Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Good. So we're going to talk about symbols today, at least for starters, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you jump
Yes.
in? Do you have something to jump in with?
Well, I think that when we talk about the way in which the dominating society sustains and creates the reality that it has put together over such a long period of time, it's pretty important to look at the way in which symbols play a role in that reality creation process. And so an example would be the statue outside the U.S. Supreme Court, The Majesty of Law, I believe the title is. And it's a Roman-looking figure with the sword, and that's one example. You also have the symbol of justice with the balance, the scale, and in one hand and the sword in the other hand. And what do these symbols mean? Why are they important? Why are they even there? Another example, as you and I have spoken about before, is the seal of Massachusetts and the depiction of native people in there and the pilgrims in there, or pilgrim figure, a native figure, and all of the elements that go into that. So I think it was a good topic for us to focus in on, because a lot of times when you look at those types of symbols and so forth, you may see some sense or hint of the theme of domination that we've been focusing on, but perhaps not. And who's interpreting those symbols? So once again, starting with that initial context, the setting of the context, which is the original free and independent existence of our native nations and peoples extending back to the beginning of time, contrasted with the system that was brought by ship across the ocean and imposed on everyone and everything. And then that viewpoint of our ancestors from the shore looking at those ships coming toward them, and the view from the deck of the ship looking toward our ancestors with the intention, as we know from examining many documents, historical documents, with the intention of establishing domination where it did not yet exist. And once we have that context, within that context, we can begin to discuss the issue of symbols and symbolism and the role that that plays in the construction of reality for everyone.
What do you think about the effort on some people's parts to destroy symbols or to erase symbols or to topple symbols in this case of statues? What is,
Well, I think that in in some sense it's removing evidence of the crime or of the prior mentality, because that symbolism is a creation of a mental world. It emerged from a mental world and a behavioral world that the people were living and exhibiting, and then they used that mental world to create the symbolism that we're talking about. So if you just wipe that out, what do you point to? What do you use as a frame of reference or a point of reference, a physical, tangible way of looking at these issues that we're even talking about? And so, for example, there's a early days statue that was in the United Nations Plaza or mall area in San Francisco, and I became very fascinated with that symbolic depiction of the past. And a lot of people say, "Oh, that's racist. It has to be removed. It has to be taken down." So they took it out and put it in a warehouse somewhere. Massive statue, and that was that. So now you go to that plaza. Where do you see any frame of reference? It's just now you got the United Nations there. But okay, so one of the depictions in that statue is a priest standing over a native person who seems like they're trying to, a man who's laying almost totally down, but he looks like he's trying to get up. And this hand of the priest above him, towering above him, is aimed at the Indian. When I saw that, my interpretation was stay down. It was an effort to keep the Indian down. But actually, if you see the finger of the priest, it's pointing heavenward. So the idea is that this priest is connected. This is the view from the ship or perspective, right? It's pointing toward heaven and transmitting some kind of energy to this beneficial, positive energy to this poor Indian who's ill, perhaps, or what have you. So these are the different kinds of things that can be discussed. And how do we arrive? Is there one true interpretation? I don't think there is. And that's where the whole matter of public discourse and exchange of ideas and attempting to illuminate a lot of these issues comes into play.
And so, following that, it seems like if what we're after is understanding the past of the present, that we need as much information as we can to begin to delve into what it is that has gone before, what it is that has maybe or maybe not been left behind. And it seems to me, if I just connect the dots of some of what you were saying about moving that statue in San Francisco, is that there's if on one hand you can look at the statue, well, the statue was a kind of an illusion, or maybe we call it a delusion. It was at least it was stating some kind of message, I guess you might say, or view of reality. And
Mhm.
to the extent that that view of reality is actually part of the structure that exists today, then removing it doesn't necessarily change. Well, I shouldn't even say necessarily. It doesn't change that structure at all. In fact, it may further mask that structure. And if in place of that statue, some other statue goes up that's currently validated, like maybe a rainbow or something like that, does that mean that the United Nations has been transformed into something different from what it was before the statue was swapped? Does it mean that the structures, the social structures, the governmental structures, the institutions themselves that are built with those deep roots, have they suddenly been changed just because there was a kind of a whitewash job done on them? Seems like the obvious answer is no. And so when we're looking at symbols, it's pretty much like it's the opposite of what we need to do. We need to open those museums up, those warehouses, and drag them all out and have an open discussion, which has at least the potential of leading people to say, "Oh, this is what this institution is built on." Well, we don't. If we don't like that, we can't just remove the symbol of the institution. We have to think about, is there any possibility of changing that institution? There may not be any possibility. It's not an easy question, but at least the discussion, whether it's a hard discussion or maybe even almost an impossible discussion, the discussion moves forward. And what we have then, what we're valorizing, you and I, when we talk about symbols, is the discussion of symbols. We're not here to say, oh, we don't like that symbol, let's take it down. That symbol is bad. We should cover it up. Put a bag over it. Paint it, move it to the warehouse. That's not the context in which we discuss these things.
Well, that's such a key point you're making. And I think that to the extent, as I already said, that you remove those from visible display, they're not available for us to reference. Now it's in a warehouse, whatever kind of depiction was being created by that statue, with whatever intention, we don't even have that available to us to have a conversation about that at all. So it's really destroying the past in the sense of the record of the past.
Hmm.
To me, it's equivalent to burning a book,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm.
That book offends me, so let's get rid of it. Let's burn all copies of it, and that guy had no business, or that woman had no business writing such a book. It seems to me that it's the opposite of intellectual inquiry and an examination of the historical record to get at a deeper understanding of how things came to be the way they are today and what are the roots of that conceptually, behaviorally, and so forth.
So we're talking really as if what we're doing is a kind of an archaeological process. We're doing a legal historical archaeology, and in some senses, this is limited to text. Like if you go find the text of the papal bull that authorizes domination, then the text itself can be looked at. Now, if that document were taken because somebody said it was offensive and it was burned, that wouldn't change the 500 years of history that followed that document. And so the,
Well, imagine I had never had any such document available to me. I heard about it, read reference to it. Maybe there was a paragraph quoted from it, Vine Deloria's book, God is Red, and William Washburn's Red Man's Land, White Man's Law. But that document was not available for me to even investigate because
Mhm.
it offended people and we had to get rid of it and remove it. Well, how in the heck could I go into the Latin and the English and investigate it and get to the insights and understandings that I've been able to gain by that investigation? It would be impossible.
Mhm.
So it would be equivalent to burning old maps or something, destroying them because well that offends me. Uh, it seems to me that the whole point of scholarship, well, Stephen Winter said it so well in his book, Clearing in the Forest, that scholarship is designed to increase understanding and, or no, expand knowledge and increase understanding. That's how he
Mhm.
put it. And so you want to gain those additional insights, and it's a long process. And hopefully, there's a back and forth, such as you and I have on an ongoing basis. And that I have with many others as well. I'm sure you do as well. And that constant inquiry, that constant effort to gain additional understandings and insights is so critical.
Yes, I'm thinking about John Marshall, for example. There's a statue of John Marshall there in Washington, the author of the so-called trilogy of cases, Johnson v. McIntosh being the first one. And we've talked about that so often, the
Yeah.
of Christian domination into U.S. law. And Marshall's reputation is so high in traditional conventional circles, even in so-called Indian law circles. I've read commentators who said Marshall was such a great judge and oh, he's so skillful with words. Well, we know he was skillful with words. And he crafted a decision which is still law today that says that none of the original peoples here own any land at all. It's all held, quote unquote, in trust for them, which was the second case that he decided. Um, and so removing that statute doesn't remove those cases. Removing those cases is a massive legal, political effort, and it would be hampered if we got rid of the image of the statue of the man who did it, because what it would do, it would detract us from, let's look besides the legal aspects that he wrote about. What about his own personal interests here? Who was this person, John Marshall? Oh, you mean he was part of a family that claimed ownership of thousands of acres in what was then they called Kentucky, and that his father was a surveyor and he was actively involved in staking claims to lands, and that Marshall's own personal property interests were involved in the decisions that he made. Well, that sounds completely unethical. And so if we don't have any encouragement to do any work there, in other words, the statute is not just inviting us into an intellectual discussion of a legal concept like Christian discovery and domination, it's also inviting us to look at the social, political, cultural, I guess you could call them, elements that are part of that decision. So it's quite widespread. We move beyond strictly talking about law to talking about images of reality, I guess. And then what are the actual, what do we know about the factual realities about this person, John Marshall, his personal connections and so forth. And we can do that same thing without a statue. Once we know, for example, that Joseph Story uh, was involved in the cases, and maybe there's no statue of Story handy. I'm sure there are statues of him, but there's nothing handy. So we're limited just to things that he wrote, like his commentaries on the Constitution. But as you said, if we say, well, let's burn those commentaries because we don't like Joseph's story and we don't like the decisions, we've become more and more impoverished in our understanding. And when we're impoverished in our understanding about that which is the view from the ship, how does that help us to articulate the view from the shore? The view from the shore is not just tear down the statue. The view from the shore is to articulate something different. It's not just a negation of the view from the ship. And I think that a lot of what causes people to be quite shallow in their, even people who listen to us and read our work and say, oh yeah, right on, we think Christian domination is bad, but many of them just stop there. It's like they've just found a meme that they can criticize. And, well, where do you go from there? What's the alternative? Well, I don't know. Why don't you tell us some more? It's not as if they're independently able to start sorting it out. And I think both of us are aiming to make people independently able to sort things out, to engage in discussions, and to not get stuck at the surface level of a symbol, but to look behind it. You had some symbols that you were going to show us, but
Yeah, I will do that. And I think I had sent some to you before. I thought maybe you were going to put those up, but if
I can
not,
do that
we'll
too.
just
Yeah.
discuss them. But the other thing with regard to the effort to remove books or symbols or whatever it might be and get those out of focus and out of view is really the trend toward totalitarianism and authoritarianism, and that whole notion that Orwell is pointing to in terms of the effort to suppress thought. And what we're trying to do is accentuate thought and promote thought and deep thought. You know, how do you engage in deep thought about the Johnson versus McIntosh decision, for example? Well, you have to first of all go into the decision and read it maybe 10,000 times, like you've probably done. I mean, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly if you're reading a particular piece of work for decades, for 4 decades or more, that's an extraordinary amount of effort intellectually just on that one piece of information, that one artistic creation of words on parchment or words on paper or whatever it might be. And so not the negation of thought, but the promotion of thought. And you have to have that available to you to be able to engage in that process. And so I think that that's so critically important that we are able to, for example, go into those, as I already said, go into those Vatican documents and get into the nitty gritty. If I hadn't done that, I was showing my daughter Shauna the other day those specific passages where it says lands discovered and to be discovered that are not under the actual um, not in the actual temporal possession of any Christian lords. That's basically how it reads in the English. Well, how in the heck did I get to not under the domination of any Christian dominators? Well, I had to go to the Latin first of all and see, okay, these are the English words, but what are these Latin words? Okay, and que sub actuality, dominio, temporality. Well, what does dominio mean? Oh my gosh, it means domination. It goes back to that dominium term and so forth and so on. And then dominorum Christianorum, if I did type that into Google Translate and it came back Christian lords, just like the English translation of the document. So, okay. But then I know that in Latin, the word Lord is dominus or domanus. Dominus, he who has subdued, which in my mind means he who has dominated. Or domanus, he who subdues. By his very nature, he subdues. By his very nature, he dominates. And so I had this interaction with the gentleman at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. I saw a man in the hallway with the collar on, the collar of the priest, and he was engaged in a conversation, and afterwards I went up to him and asked if he was with the Holy See, and he said yes, he was. And just random, totally random, I said, well, you probably know Latin. What does Dominorum Christianorum mean? And he said, well, it probably means lords, probably master, probably mister. Yes, mister. And I said, oh, okay. So in other words, land's not possessed by any Mr. Christian. And he said, well, it's best not to translate it into English because it would not fit. Okay. So I go into the other room where the forum is going on, and I'm standing just inside the doorway, and there's a guy that I know standing to my left, and we're kind of having this sideways conversation and looking at the room. And that man with the Holy See, he goes toward their chair over there. And the next thing I know, he's back in front of me, and he takes me by the arm and escorts me out of the room, and the door closes, and it's very quiet in the hallway. And he says, now, that term you were talking about, I believe that's referring to Jesus Christ or God, which is kind of weird for him to say. And, and I said, oh, okay. Well, then I have another question for you. There's another sentence in the document. I've never said what the document is that says, we trust in him. And when I said the word him, he said, that's Jesus Christ or God. And I continued and I said, from whom empires and dominations and all good things proceed. So if the empires and dominations are coming out of him, who is Jesus Christ or God, does that mean it's a God of domination? And he never paused for one moment and he said, well, everything comes from God, the birds and the trees. And what was your name again?
You know, uh, it's
No, wait. So I'm not, so there's a little bit more to the story. So that evening, across the street from the UN, there's the 777 building, National Council of Churches, World Council of Churches, and people convene over there. And we had a panel discussion on the doctrine of discovery there that evening. And a professor of Latin showed up, and he taught at Wesleyan College or University, whichever that is, and he was originally from Africa. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, you teach Latin? What does Dominorum Christianorum mean? And he said, as fast as just as instantaneously, he said, Christian dominators. And I thought, oh my gosh. So what are the odds of me having this bizarre interaction with, turned out he was the brand new nuncio of the Vatican at the UN. And I had this interaction with him, and then afterwards, this interaction with the Latin professor. And I think perhaps because he was from Africa, maybe that's the way he translated it for that reason. But going back to the original wording in the document, I could have easily just stopped at, oh, okay, it means Christian lords and call it good, right? That after all, Google Translate told me that, so it must be true, right?
hmm So digging into Latin means digging into the roots of the words that we're using in English and discovering, oh, wait a minute, it doesn't really mean what it has been, how it's been translated in English. And so the archaeology proceeds on so many levels there. And when you talked about burning a book, uh, you and I, we've been talking a little bit about Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, his role in the constitution, if I can play on words there, of the Vatican, of the Roman Church. And the story, I don't want to go on all the details, we'll do that another time, but Constantine has this awakening. Oh, the cross is a symbol of victory for him. And so he turns on a dime and says, oh, the Roman state is not going to criminalize Christianity anymore. We're going to take advantage of it. And one of the ways that he took advantage was immediately after he wins this battle that his vision said he was going to win if he adopted the cross, he calls together all the bishops that are all the kind of the leaders of the various divergent, groups of people who said that they were following the teachings of Jesus. And his assignment at what became, it was the Council of Nicaea, where he brought together hundreds. I think some people have said there are 3,000 people at this council. And he says the most important thing for the security of the empire is that the church should have a single doctrine, and that any doctrine that deviates from that is going to be prohibited. And the short end of the long story, because the council lasted for some months, was that they came up with a creed, and it said that this is the only true statement about the following of Jesus. And this is where the connection begins to be made between Jesus and domination. the other groups that were worshiping Jesus had all kinds of different views, even about the relationship between Jesus and God. That, Jesus was this powerful person who was, you can say, some of them said he was definitely the Son of God, but that didn't mean that he was God. And that meant that the apostles, quote unquote, who hung around with Jesus, if he was the Son of God, but he wasn't God, well, then they're already another step removed from God. Whereas the official position of the creed that came out of the Council of Nicaea under Constantine's sort of demand, basically, you come up with one thing, that group said that Jesus was God. This is where the development of the idea of the three in one God. And they quarreled about, you talk about language, they quarreled about the language in the creed, that it had to say that he was begotten, not made, that he was of the same substance, consubstantial, with the Father, so that they were emphasizing that there's God in their conception, there's Jesus, who was also God, even though he was the Son of God. And then the apostles around that figure of Jesus, who were the ones who were carrying this supposed teaching, they themselves were speaking with the authority of God. And that meant that the laying on of hands that had created these bishops from the original apostles, that each of the bishops was speaking as God. And so even today, one of the titles for the Pope is the Vicar of Christ. Vicar being the word meaning it's like the vice regent. I'm the one who's in charge. In the name of God and in exercising God's power, when I'm speaking ex cathedra, these Latin words are still used. And so what happened was that this thing called the Christian church was created as a moment of domination within the Roman world and was then the instrument when the Roman world basically collapsed as a military phenomenon. The apparatus of domination was still available and was maintained by these church authorities, among whom one was elevated to be the Pope, the Vicar of Christ. And everything that proceeds from that was all the elaboration on the original domination that Constantine had imposed on Christianity. So that the people, there was a bishop named Arianus, I think was his name. He was one of the teachers who said, we follow Jesus as the Son of God, but he's not the same as God. That was anathema now. And because a creed had been established, the followers, the Arianism, they could be attacked. And as it developed, I'm skipping over some many years now, but you get into the time of the Inquisition, and the people who continued to follow those beliefs were vilified and attacked. And the Inquisition, one of the earliest, maybe the earliest massive attacks on these non-approved beliefs was in what we call France now, in a place called Béziers. And the troops had come in and they said, and they knew they were to attack this town because it was a hotbed of this Arianism and the non-belief, the divergent belief. And they asked the bishop, how are we going to know which people to kill? And the bishop said, kill them all. God will know who to sort out. So 30,000 people were killed. Now, if that isn't an example of domination, and the reason I'm bringing it in behind what you just said is that Council of Nicaea created words, but it also created certain symbols. And among them, of course, the symbol of the cross. And what did the cross really mean? And so the cross became the symbol. And if the cross was supposed to be the symbol of some kind of sacrifice, it also became a clear symbol of domination. And so if we go back to those years through the centuries, and we have access to all of that. And one of the things that's been happening, speaking of archaeology in the last few decades, is more archaeologists have found more documents besides the ones that were allowed to be considered as part of the gospel. And there's even a gospel of Judas, by the way. And there's a gospel of Mary Magdalene. And very important things come out of those gospels, which were antithetical to the domination framework that was built around God, Jesus, the apostles, and the bishops. And there's there's a clear alternative available because of that archaeology. I guess that's what
Mm.
I'm trying to get at. And so that in addition to criticizing, we can criticize the Constantinian Nicene Creed structure, the structure of domination, but now we can actually go behind that and see how that was created, how the domination system that gave birth to Christian discovery and domination 500 years later after the 1493 papal bull, or at that time, was already being created, that the dominator was creating a system of domination for itself.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know if I'm making that clear, but
yeah,
it's yeah.
yeah. And so with regard to the symbolism, the cross or Jesus on the cross, the crucified Jesus on the cross, that is the depiction in a symbolic form of some set of beliefs, right?
Mhm.
With regard and also that contest, that challenge that you're discussing that resulted in so much bloodshed and heinous, suffering and misery and so forth. But the interesting thing about the symbol of Jesus on the cross is is that an example of a person who spoke out against the empire, and this is what can happen to you as well if you speak out against the empire, or is it something else? And I think that that's a very uh, interesting phenomenon. Just how do people arrive at interpretations and which one wins out, so to speak, as you're speaking of with regard to Constantine. And by the way, the flaming cross in the sky that he supposedly saw in his vision and all that uh, had Greek words that said, "By this sign conquer," which, in my way of interpreting it, is by this sign dominate. And that word victory is a key term for that domination. And you have from victory, you also have victim. That's the same root of the on the receiving end of the victory are the people that are the victims of that victory. But you also have victuals, which is the food of the victor, which is really weird because it's spelled the same, but it's pronounced so differently that you would never see the connection. And so that's I just see some of these things at times and wonder about it all in terms of how they use the terms to create meaning, but also to obfuscate meaning, or to maybe some other interpretation won out, and you're not allowed to mention that other one. He was not a flesh and blood man, if he even existed, but he was not a flesh and blood man. He was divine, and you're not allowed to say that or even suggest that he was a flesh and blood man. That type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. You're talking about decoding stuff. So I want to share. I'm going to share the screen for a minute and then come back because I know you have some other images to share. Um, so let's see here. We share this, and if I go here, no, I want to go here. This is a picture. This is in a museum that I visited. This is an Enigma machine. You've heard of the Enigma machines that the Nazis used. They were
Yeah.
coding machines, coding and decoding to carry secret messages. And I mean, I was stunned when I saw this. It's just to think about everything that went into it, talk about violence and all the rest of it. What were the secrets were that were being shared and who was being excluded and all. And these were the machines. And the particular machine that they have here, I'm going to see if I can zoom in. And by the way, it's made by Siemens. You can buy products from Siemens today. Notice what it says here. This is a German high command Enigma machine. It had 10 rotors, and it was only used by five entities within the German high command. And notice what it says. The average time to decode a message on a normal Enigma machine was 1 hour. But to decode a message from this high command machine took 4 days. So four
Hmm.
days by the people who were running the system to figure out the message.
Wow.
And so I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. Stop share here. Just what does it take to decipher all this stuff? One message sent in the Nazi high command on this machine, which was just for them, 4 days of work. Now, what about a whole vast archive of documents from the Vatican going back to the time of Constantine? What about all the material that's been digested and translated and all the rest of that? You're not just talking about one message to take 4 days. You're talking about massive amounts of information, and we're here at the far end, and we don't have an Enigma machine. We don't have something. You are the Enigma machine. You go, you read the Latin. You study the Latin, you ask experts, you dig into dictionaries, you dig into translations, you ask people that you bump into by the grace of whatever, the creation that says, oh, you get to meet this guy from Africa, you get this guy, the nuncio, right? So all of those things which go into your ability to decode Dominorum Christianorum in a way that has some integrity and authenticity to it that you can demonstrate, that's how many years of work, really, to
Well, and interestingly, I think the extent to which there's a element of spirit and mystery and just the magic of the process, where what are the odds of those all those elements coming together in one particular day? But if I hadn't been on this path, none of that would have ever transpired because you had to be on the path for that to occur, right? And
yeah.
it's a spiritual path. But in terms of the decoding, that's where it gets very interesting because is it the case that it isn't Christian lords? No, it is Christian lords in a given context. Yeah, that's accurate too. So it's not necessarily a matter of rejecting the one, it's adding the additional one that gives you that even deeper insight and understanding that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
Mhm.
And I think that give you like let me give you an example, and I think you have this, but there's the seal, Great Seal of the United States. And there was a lot of discussion that went into that. I wrote about it in my book, Pagans in the Promised Land, as you'll probably recall. And there was a discussion of whether to depict the Israelites going into the Promised Land or moving toward the Promised Land, that sort of thing. And there was a discussion of what images shall we put into this very important seal, the seal that's supposed to be forever, right? If you want your empire to last forever. Or I think it was Madison who said that it's something that must last for ages. That's pretty much eternal. And by the way, in the Papal Bull, it talks about the grants being made in perpetua, meaning eternally or forever. So there's that element of permanence, right? And but the seal of South Dakota, which I sent you, the outer edge of the seal has a chain all the way around that. In other words, to depict the idea that the land itself has been changed, it has been captured, and everything within that is the territory, the domain of the empire, a state called South Dakota. And it's amazing to just allow yourself to engage in kind of a free flow of interpretations and so forth to get at some of those insights. Now, what happened in terms of the passage of time, eventually they took that chain off of there and updated the seal of South Dakota so that it wouldn't depict that chaining of the land. And who knows what discussions went into those revisions and so forth. So did they feel like they had to clean it up a bit, or who knows?
um, let me get to it. There's the seal.
And there it is. Yeah. Now
Yeah.
try to find a native person in there. I don't think you'll find one.
Well, try to find anybody that would look at that and actually think about it. That's
Yeah.
what is most astounding about all this type of symbol. But
Yes.
even ones that are less complicated, like the cross, just with the bare, cross things, that has to be read in a sense. It has to be
Yeah.
interpreted. And and so when you look at something like this that has all these little pieces in it, every one of them, as you said, there was it's like, well, obviously it was done by an artist and whoever made the design, and however many people had to confer about it and how many discussions they had about it. But the point is now people don't even see this. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just there. It's just like an image on your driver's license, perhaps, or and until it gets replaced by another image, and you don't look at that one either. And so a whole language. So who is this language being read by? Obviously, when you started talking about Madison and others, there's a cohort of people who are very much attuned to this kind of thing and very clear about this is where the Enigma machine comes in. There are coded messages here. And that code is something that's quite well understood by the people who are working with the images, creating the images. And it's sort of the people who are not part of that. If I look at this and I'm saying, oh, well, look at the farmer. Yeah, it's a good thing. Farmers were important in the state of South Dakota. And I'm not necessarily even going to see, well, wait a minute, there's a whole chain around the farmer. Like, what is that supposed to mean? Were the farmers in chains? I mean, what was the relationship of the farmers to the land in South? I'm probably not going to ask those questions, but if I do, I'm treading onto some ground where most likely uh, it begins to be forbidden territory. I'm asking questions that were not expected to be asked by ordinary people.
right. Well, and the other thing is, how did I obtain that image? I went to the archives, the State of South Dakota archives in Pure, South Dakota, and went in there and found that seal image. And if I hadn't bothered doing that, I wouldn't ever have known that that even existed. But also I previously had read about surveying being called chaining the land. That was the metaphor that they were using, the image of chaining land, literally chaining land. And then when I saw that chain on the seal, I said, "Oh my goodness, what an amazing thing that they were conscious of that and made sure that they put that on the seal." Then later they kind of sanitized it apparently to take that off of there and no longer depict that in that manner.
So here's another one that you sent me. This is South Dakota, and it's a stone marker saying that right under this place there was a lead tablet buried to claim the region for France. All right, so this is much earlier than uh, so-called South Dakota was.
1743 or something, as
Yeah.
I recall.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, what's interesting about this then is that the symbol on the lead tablet, and lead was known even then to be basically indestructible, lasts forever, imperpetual, etc.
Yeah.
But it was buried. It was put on the ground. It was not hung up for people to look at. And so there's another. This I think connects to your work on symbols of possession. What's the phrase there? So, the ceremonies of
Yeah. Ceremonies of possession. Yep.
so those were done. They were also using symbols. They were
Yes.
using words and symbols, but they were not erecting them high like statues. They were putting them close on the ground. And so there's something there that's, you talk about magical mystery tour, something in the mind of the people who do this kind of thing says, if I put my mark here, I've conquered this. I own this. This is not a mark that I put up that everybody is to see, but this is like the little trademark symbol, the tiny trademark symbol or something like that. I've now trademarked this land. I don't know, do you want to say something more about this? But it's
Well, that's such a great metaphor, trademark, because they're engaging in trade and there's all kinds of ways you could extend that. But the the notion, and I took a field trip group of students from St. Francis Indian School up to that marker, to that little area, and uh, and showed them the ridiculous nature of a people can come traipsing across a whole continent and stick a lead plate in the ground. It's interesting that metaphor, unearthing information, right? So then somebody stumbled upon that. But they put that lead plate in the ground that they carried. It wasn't very heavy, it was pretty thin apparently, but they carried it all that way. And then they're on an overlook. So you could see a great distance from that vantage point. And so then suddenly they put that there and it's all theirs. It belongs to them, even though there are original nations and peoples already living there, existing there, but they don't have access to that French language, perhaps, and certainly don't understand the symbolism, the interpretive framework of the Frenchman in putting that there. And they're representative of a very elite, small, relatively small group of people. We talked about that before as well. Those scribes that wrote those papal documents, how many of those were there on the entire planet? I mean, were there 10, 20, 100? I doubt it. There were probably a handful, and they had come through the ranks of being a scribe to get to that ability to write in the manner of the ancient Roman contracts. That's why those Vatican documents are so long and so detailed, because they're contractual agreements in a sense, right?
Yeah.
They're all agreeing on a particular form of reality. You go there, and we're authorizing you because we have the connection to God to give you this authority to go forth, embark on an adventure, to go forth as heroic figures, and to identify the geographical location of places where that form of domination does not yet exist.
I want to do a couple of things before. I want you to talk more about spirituality, but before, this is a German sword from, this is an actual, this is like the original thing. It's not a replica. 1570 German sword. And you can see the cross image there. I want to show you, I'm bouncing around in the screen here.
Hmm.
But let me show you there. This is Italian, very really finely wrought, and this is 15th century. The other one was 16th century, and so the spiritual symbol of the cross is carried right there in a sword, and these are unbelievable. I was allowed to handle one of these, and they are so finely wrought. There was so much effort and energy and artistry put into this, and it's a union of the religious symbol and the military power right there
Hmm.
as an
Now, is that showing up on the screen? Because I'm not seeing it
it says,
I hope the viewers can see it. What?
well, okay, it says that it's screen sharing, so I don't know.
Okay, I'm not seeing it.
Okay, well, let's try it again.
I don't know if that's just me.
Well, it says participants can see my screen.
Okay, we'll assume that's the case.
I'll see when do you see the Italian sword there?
I don't.
Okay.
Oh, now I do. Okay, now I do. I had
That,
to click something else. Yeah.
okay. That's the Italian sword.
Oh, look at that. Wow. Isn't that something? Yes.
Quite amazing. Yeah. You can
The
see quite amazing work done on it. But
yes.
that union, that's a union. That's Constantine's cross right there. In hoc
Right.
signo vinces in the Latin.
Yeah,
That
there you go.
by this sign
Right.
I will conquer. So pretty astounding.
Yeah.
And for people that want just a quick fix, you can get this. I found this in a store in Baltimore years ago. You can get an aerosol commanding do my will, and it has a picture of Jesus with the thorns around his head. And the next one, aerosol Espirita Dominante. Now, I don't know what kind of person or what kind of household or what kind of whatever would want air domination air spray, but it's pretty intense to discover stuff like this. And I don't, so I didn't know who to ask. It was just in a store that I happened to into something
What store was that?
in Baltimore, some little store
Oh
in
my
Baltimore.
goodness.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
amazing.
So would you say something more about uh, what we've been talking about? A lot of people might think that the whole work is done by crawling into the archives. But my sense is if you're crawling into the archives with no spiritual guidance, you're just going to wander in the archives forever. You're going to be lost in the maze. And I'm thinking that without making any claims about spiritual guidance or anything else, let's just use the view. If you have nothing of the view from the shore, how are you going to understand to be able to see the view from a ship as something extraneous to you that you're not engulfed in? And it seems to me the view from the ship has become so much of an engulfment of people. It includes even people who consider themselves tribal council leaders, for example. So I thought maybe you, if you want to, and I'll put this up while you're talking,
Yeah.
getting near the top of the hour. So this is a spiritual statement by an amazing John Trudell. This is graffiti. So I'm also thinking, what's the difference between graffiti and a statue, an official statue? Is the statue graffiti? I don't know. Just toss that out. But if you don't
Well,
understand,
there's uh, a lot of, there are many directions I could take your question with regard to the spiritual. I mean, I did say it's a spiritual path, so what do I mean by that? The in the sense that I understand it, it has to do with the effort to come to a deeper understanding of what this life on planet Earth is all about and what has transpired over such a long period of time, and what our native nations and peoples and other peoples around the planet have been put through, what they have been subjected to. But there's an element of what I'll call spirit, but it's energy. By that word, I actually mean energy. That there's an energy of inquiry, that curiosity. I think that's a good word for it. There's that curiosity that becomes so passionate, so absorbing, completely overtaking you in such a way that you are compelled to go deeper and deeper and always continue on and never stop. And if you're fortunate enough to experience something like that and to allow that to carry you forward, then you can arrive at amazing insights and understandings. I think there's an element of mystery to it in terms of what is it about my life that enabled me to do the things that I've done, not having any awareness of how to do it, just bumbling along and always having that forward momentum. I didn't know how to read Latin, for example, but I just made the effort to do that, and somehow found the means of understanding those needle and haystack phrases and passages within those documents, which are quite lengthy, that enabled me to focus in on that one theme. And so I'm not being very lucid in how I'm explaining all this, but there's something that has happened also where, because at a very young age as a teenager, I was able to go into ceremony with very extraordinary spiritual leaders and experience in a sense, the magic of those settings. I'm using that term very loosely, but the profound nature of spiritual connection, the spirit within ourselves, the spirit of all life, the spirit of all creation, and to actually have that not as an intellectual concept and idea, but an actual experience of something so deep and profound that you can't really put it into words. You might attempt to, and there are some poetic ways in which we can allude to that, but it's something that is at such a deep level, and I think we share that in common. It's this curiosity about how do we make sense of it all, and the graffiti, quote unquote, the artwork of John Trudell there, he's also talking about that in the sense of a curiosity of what does it mean to be a human being, which I've now got a whole different take on that than I did before, because in that city of San Diego versus Cuyamaca Water District decision in 1930, the state of California Supreme Court is saying that only a state of barbarism was existing in California when the Spaniards arrived. Well, we know from our readings and investigation that that means only a partially human existence or maybe a non-human existence. So you have to go through some kind of a process to become human. So the process is to be stripped of your free existence, baptized, given a Christian name, forced under torment, misery, and suffering inflicted by the priests and soldiers to build those massive mission structures in California. Now you're on your way to becoming human. Doesn't that change our understanding of what human means in that context?
Hmm.
For the so oh, you're born into a free society. Yeah, well, maybe not so much. Maybe that was the propaganda to make you believe that, but actually you were born into a system of domination, shock of all shocks to find out, oh my gosh, the implications of this information is so profound as to be almost kind of unbelievable. But yet we see it continue to play out over the course of our lifetimes, and it will continue to do so. But I think we're getting to that deeper insight and understanding of what those actual roots are. But the beautiful thing is we have that original free existence to reference, so that we have that as our sacred birthright. We all, as quote unquote Homo sapiens, if we want to use that label, have this sacred birthright of the right to be free, even if others are trying to strip us of that right, and that ability to live to live a free life. But what does that word even mean in many different contexts?
Yeah, we're near the end of the hour. I think we
Yeah,
can leave. It's pretty intense. What you just said is that what the basic thing that we're doing is trying to understand being human, being alive on this planet. What does that mean? And not even getting caught in those words. There aren't any words. As you pointed out, the word human has already been captured by the apparatus of something called human rights. And so human rights, what does that mean? But that's another whole discussion we'll get into another time, that being human is one phenomenon that you were talking about, and rights is a whole different thing that's tied to states and laws and everything else. But I'm really happy that you were able and willing to say a few words about the deep guidance, I guess, or root or wellspring of the work. So,
I think the last thing I want to say about that is that we have an understanding that we do have ancestral assistance. You know, we do have people that, I mean, spirits that are assisting us, energy that is assisting us in the work that we're doing. And, you know, I say my spirit helpers have glasses really thick, you know. Um, anyway, leave it at that.
Steve, thank you again very much. I'll be in touch.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Lepichkadeva.